The way he slid the folder across the desk was disrespectful in itself. Just a casual push across the polished mahogany, right over a coffee ring stain. My name was typed on the tab, Noah E. Demir, not Emra, just E. A single, impersonal initial. 17 years. I'd given this family 17 years of my life. I'd built my father's company, Demir Holdings, from a scrappy import-export firm into a sleek, 12-story Atlanta powerhouse. I'd sat next to my uncle as he learned the business, taught my cousins how to read a profit and loss sheet, and recovered our entire digital infrastructure after the blackout crash of 2011. I wrote the onboarding manual. They still use Dot, and now my uncle, Cyrus Demir, the man who took over as CEO after my father's semi-retirement, couldn't even look me in the eye. "It's a strategic pivot, Noah," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He stared at a point just past my left shoulder. "The board feels your position is no longer aligned with the company's future direction." Beside him, a woman from Etcher, not Linda. Someone new, younger offered a smile so brittle, I thought, it might shatter. In the corner, a man in a suit I didn't recognize sat silently. Legal. They'd brought legal to fire my father's son. I didn't blink. I didn't speak. I just reached out, took the folder, and slid it into my worn leather satchel, a gift from my father on my first day. No questions. No protest. I stood slowly, the familiar creak of my knees, the only sound in the oppressively quiet room. Cyrus finally looked at me, his eyes flickering with something not regret, but surprise. He'd expected tears, anger, begging. He didn't know me at all. He'd forgotten who built the walls he was hiding behind. The walkout was the longest of my life. The fourth floor, my floor, was a tomb. The soft hum of monitors, the quiet thud of keystrokes, it all felt muffled, as if the very air was ashamed. Heads ducked down behind screens. My people, the ones I'd trained, the ones who'd shared coffee with me, who'd laughed at my stories. About my daughter, Hilara. Now I was a ghost, a contagion to be avoided. My desk was by the window with the leaky seal. On clear days, you could see the Atlanta skyline. Today, it was just a blur of gray. My world had shrunk to 3 personal items. A framed photo of Alara, at 10, holding a science trophy almost bigger than her smile wide and full of a future. I'd worked to secure a ceramic mug that read "World's Okayest Dad." The handle was cracked, superglued back on more times than I could count. A small brass compass. My father's. He'd given it to me when I first joined the company. "When you can't trust the map, Noah," he'd said, his voice still strong, "then you follow true north. You follow your own moral code." I placed them gently into my bag. The silence around me was a roaring thing. "Noah?" I turned. It was Sarah from marketing, her lipstick slightly smudged, her eyes wide. "I just heard. This is insane. You built this place." "It's not about building, Sarah," I said, my voice low. "It's about replacing." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She touched my arm, a brief, fleeting gesture of solidarity, then turned and hurried away. At the reception desk, Tanya, who'd been here almost as long as I had, looked up as I handed her my keycard. Her face fell. "Effective immediately?" she asked, her voice hushed. "Apparently," I said. She hesitated before taking it. "You were always decent to me, Mr. Demir. Some people upstairs, they forget where they came from." I gave her a small, grim nod and stepped out into the overcast Atlanta afternoon. The air felt different, heavier. I sat in my car for a long time, the engine off, just staring up at the gleaming glass monolith at Demir Holdings. I'd started when it was 2 floors in a shared tech park. I'd fought to keep the lights on, literally. And now I was just gone. erased by my own blood. A cold, focused clarity began to wash over the initial shock. This wasn't just a business decision. This was personal. This was Cyrus and his son, my cousin Julian, consolidating power, cutting out the last remnant of the old guard me. I reached over and popped open the glove compartment. Inside, nestled next to the manual, was a small, unremarkable black USB. Drive on a keyring. My insurance policy. Years ago, after a data breach, I was asked by the board, by my own father, to create a failsafe. A mirrored off-site backup of all critical systems, change logs, admin records, and communications. For audit integrity. They'd signed the waiver, praised my foresight, and promptly forgot about it. But I hadn't, because over the past 18 months, I'd noticed things. Small things. Unexplained administrative changes. Odd vendor approvals. Cyrus's son, Julian, being fast-tracked into a VP role he wasn't qualified for, his access privileges soaring. I'd seen invoices from companies I didn't recognize Nexapoint. Solutions, Westbridge Digital with addresses that traced back to UPS stores, not office buildings. I'd started digging. Not for revenge then, for the company, for my father's legacy dot, and now they'd fired me. They'd let me walk out without revoking my old system credentials, without a proper exit interview, without even checking my bag. They thought they were firing the quiet, reliable cousin, the family workhorse who fixed problems and asked for no applause. They had no idea. They'd just fired the only man who knew the combination to every vault they were robbing. I started the car. The engine purred to life. I didn't drive home immediately. Instead, I drove to a small park overlooking the city. I pulled out the USB drive, and my laptop. The system recognized my login instantly. A ghost in the machine. I clicked open a folder labeled Project Raven, a name I'd chosen for the dark birds that circled when something was dying. Inside was a spiderweb of connections. Invoices, metadata, approval chains, Nexapoint solutions. $6,200, $7,800, $9,100. Payments growing each month, labeled infrastructure optimization. The project IDs didn't exist. The domain was registered 4 days before the first invoice. The business address was a mailbox in a Decatur strip. My fingers flew across the keyboard, cross-referencing, digging deeper. The registered agent for Nexapoint was listed as J.P. Wilcox. A cold smile touched my lips. Wilcox? Patricia Wilcox. My uncle Cyrus's wife. My aunt. This wasn't just mismanagement. This was embezzlement. A sophisticated, family-run scheme. And they just removed the only person who could see the threads. I leaned back, the pieces clicking into place with the satisfying finality of a lock turning. Their first mistake was underestimating me. Their second was not being thorough enough. But their worst mistake? They thought this was about my job. They had no idea this was about blood. Theirs. I closed the laptop and looked out at the city, at the building that bore my name, but had just disowned me. You shouldn't have fired the man who built the vault, Cyrus, I whispered to the skyline. You shouldn't have fired the man who still holds the key. I drove home. The house, a quiet haven at the end of a cul-de-sac in East Marietta, felt different now. It wasn't just a home. It was my command center. My wife, Clara, was already there. Her car was in the driveway. She always got home from her teaching job by 3:30. It was 3:47. She met me at the door, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She didn't ask. She just took one look at my face, her own expression tightening. She poured me a cup of coffee and pushed it across the kitchen island. Bad? She asked softly. I nodded. Gone. She didn't flinch. Just let the word hang in the air between us. She'd been with me through everything. She knew the weight of that word in a family business. They didn't even look me in the eye, Clara. She reached across the counter, her hand covering mine. You were? The best thing that ever happened to that company, Noah Demir. I didn't answer, because a part of me was already gone, already turning away from the hurt and toward something else entirely. A cold, quiet, and calculated reckoning. That night, while the house slept, I went to my home office. In the bottom drawer of a filing cabinet, behind old tax returns and Alara's elementary school awards, was a metal lockbox. Inside were 3 USB drives, labeled not with words, but with colored dots. Only I knew the code. I plugged in the red drive, the one I hadn't touched in over a year. It wasn't just a backup. It was a weapon. And it was time to arm myself. The screen glowed in the dark room, illuminating my father's brass compass. Sitting on the desk, the needle pointed steadfastly north. I didn't need a compass to know where I was going. I was going to war. A quiet war. And I was going to win. The silence of my home office was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the oppressive hush of the Demir Holdings 4th floor. It was the focused stillness of a hunter, waiting for prey to step into the clearing. The only light came from my monitor, casting a pale blue glow on my father's compass. True north. It wasn't pointing toward the company anymore. It was pointing toward the truth. Clara had gone to bed hours ago, leaving a fresh thermos of coffee on my desk. She didn't ask questions. She just reinforced the perimeter. She knew. The man who had come home yesterday was gone, replaced by something colder, sharper, a tool honed for a single purpose. The red USB drive was my lifeline to the beast. My credentials, surprisingly, still worked. Not all of them, of course. My official admin account was deactivated, a dead fish floating in the corporate network. But the old legacy system accounts, the backdoors I'd built into the infrastructure for disaster recovery, signed off on by the board years ago, they were still alive. Sleeping dragons they'd forgotten to slay. My first login was like stepping into a familiar house where the lights were off, and the occupants thought they were alone. I could hear their digital footsteps, see the faint traces of their activity in the logs. I started with Nexapoint Solutions, a phantom vendor. The one tied to my Aunt Patricia's family. Each invoice was a masterpiece of bland fraud, infrastructure optimization, license streamlining, network efficiency consultation, meaningless corporate jargon, designed to glide through automated approval systems without a human glance. The amounts were always perfect, rounded, never suspicious enough to trigger an audit flag. $6,200, $7,800, $9,100. It was the pattern that betrayed them. The gentle, predictable upward creep. I cross-referenced the approval logs with the employee directory. The digital signatures belonged to junior finance officers, fresh-faced kids. Right out of college, their profiles now marked with the new title, Rising Star Fast Track Program. A program my cousin Julian had implemented. They were pawns. Unknowing accomplices rubber-stamping theft orchestrated from the top. I dove deeper into the server logs most people didn't know existed. The metadata didn't lie. The IP addresses for the approvals that mattered, the ones that changed vendor routing tables, didn't originate from the office. They came from a VPN, and that VPN's exit node traced back to a luxury resort in the Cayman Islands. A resort whose guest list, which I may have encouraged a friendly former contact to access, included my Uncle Cyrus for 2 weeks last spring. He wasn't just approving inflated invoices. He was doing it from the beach, paid for by the very money. He was stealing. A cold fury settled in my stomach, not hot and raging, but icy and precise. This was my father's life's work, the company he'd built from a single truck into an empire. And they were treating it like a personal ATM. My fingers moved to another set of logs. Access records for the Finks 4-2 approval group, the shadowy digital backroom I'd discovered. The username that appeared most frequently wasn't Cyrus's. It was JDEMIR_admin.Julian, my cousin, the golden child, the one who'd never stayed past 5 p.m., who'd always treated the technical side of the business with dismissive contempt. He was neck deep in it, playing with tools he didn't understand, leaving fingerprints everywhere. I began assembling the evidence not as a report, but as a story, a chronology of betrayal. I created a visual map, nodes connecting people to shell companies, to invoices, to digital fingerprints. It was a thing of terrible beauty, a spiderweb of deceit, and I had the entire web preserved in digital amber. A soft knock startled me. Clara stood in the doorway, wrapped in a robe, her face etched with concern. Noah, it's 4 a.m. I know, I said, my eyes not leaving the screen. She came over, placed a hand on my shoulder, and looked at the intricate web of connections on my monitor. She let out a slow, shuddering breath. Oh, Noah, your father, he can't know. Not yet. Not until I have it all. My voice was flat. He's not well enough for this. She squeezed my shoulder. What are you going to do? I minimized the map, revealing a different screen, a secure, encrypted email client. I'm not going to shout. I'm going to whisper. I drafted an email. Not to the board, not to my father. That would come later. This was a test. A single, subtle pressure applied to the most brittle point in their structure. My cousin Julian's ego. To j.demir@demirholdings.com from compliance-review-A83@demir-network.net, a ghost address from an old internal testing domain. One I'd created and they'd never decommissioned. Subject, query, vendor onboarding, Nexapoint Solutions, LLC body. Dear Mr. Demir, a routine compliance sweep has flagged irregularities in the onboarding documentation and payment authorization chain for vendor Nexapoint Solutions, LLC. Vendor ID #NP22841. Please clarify the scope of services rendered for invoice. #X72813, May 17th, $9,100.00, and provide the associated project charter and delivery. Sign off as per Corporate Policy 4.1b. This query has been logged for audit trail purposes under case #CR-8842. Thank you. Automated Compliance Review System Demir. Holdings Internal Audit. Unmonitored inbox. I didn't hit send. I scheduled it for 9:15 a.m., right in the middle of his first coffee of the day. Then, I waited. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. Nothing. I drank coffee with Clara on the porch. I watched the birds. I pretended to read the news. But my phone was on the table beside me. Face up. At 9:17 a.m., it lit up. A call from unknown. I let it ring out. At 9:23 a.m., another. Then a third. A text message popped up. Julian. What is this? What are you playing at? Call me. Now. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I didn't type a paragraph. I didn't type a sentence. I typed 5 words. 5 words that would feel like a pinprick to a man drowning in arrogance. I've only begun organizing. Files. I placed the phone back on the table. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. 30 seconds later, my phone buzzed again, but this time it was Clara's. She looked at the screen, her eyebrows rising. It's Elara? My daughter. They'd called my daughter. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was a new low. I nodded for Clara to answer, putting it on speaker. Mom, is Dad there? Elara's voice was confused, a little worried. Uncle Cyrus just called me. He was being all weird and grandfatherly, asking how school was. And then he said if I talked to Dad, I should tell him that family matters should stay in the family. What does that mean? Is everything okay? The air left my lungs. They weren't just thieves. They were cowards, using my father's memory and my daughter's innocence as a shield. Clara's eyes met mine, blazing with a protective fury I hadn't seen in years. Everything's fine, sweetie, she said, her voice miraculously calm. Your uncle is just confused. We'll handle it. Love you. She hung up and looked at me. The last vestiges of hesitation in my eyes died in that moment. They had made it personal in a way I could never forgive. That's it, Clara said, her voice cold steel. No mercy, Noah. I walked back to my office, the compass feeling heavy in my pocket. I didn't just have a web of financial fraud. I had proof of their moral bankruptcy. It was time to stop whispering. I opened a new email. The recipient was one man, Robert Bull Mallory, the head of the company's audit committee, a former Marine, a friend of my father's, a man with zero tolerance for excuses and a legendary hatred for corporate sleaze. He was old school. He respected paper. I attached the first 10 pages of my report, the most damning 10 pages. The Nexapoint invoices, the IP logs from the Cayman Islands, the approval chain showing Julian's admin ID. The subject line was simple. Per our conversation regarding fiscal year oversight, we'd had no conversation, but he would read it. The body of the email was even simpler. Bob thought you should see this. More to follow. Noah, I hit send. There was no scheduled delay, no second thoughts. The message vanished from my outbox. The die was cast out an hour later. My phone rang again. The number was from the company's main switchboard. I answered, saying, Nothing, Noah. It was Cyrus. His voice was strained, a thin veneer of calm over raw panic. Noah, what are you doing? We're family. We can fix this. Let's have lunch. Talk this through like men. I listened to the silence on the line for a 3 count. I could almost hear his sweat dripping onto his $1,000 desk. There's nothing to talk about, Cyrus, I said, my voice quiet, flat and final. You should have thought about family before you started stealing from it. I ended the call. Outside, the sky was beginning to darken with the threat of a summer storm. I looked at the compass. The needle held steady. The storm wasn't just coming anymore, Dot. It had already arrived. The silence after I hung up on Cyrus was the most profound sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a bridge, meticulously maintained for decades, exploding into a million pieces behind me. There was no going back. The 5 words I'd sent. Julian, I've only begun organizing files, were no longer a warning. They were a promise. And the email to Bull Mallory was the first brick thrown through their glass house. Clara stood in the doorway of my office, her arms crossed. She didn't need to ask. The look on my face told her everything. Ilara called back. She's scared. Cyrus really got to her. The icy calm inside me solidified into diamond-hard resolve. They're panicking. They're trying to get to me through her. It's the only move they have left. What did you do, Noah? I sent Bull Mallory a preview. A slow, grim smile touched her lips. The bulldog. Good. He'll chew on that and come back for the whole meal. The next few hours were a masterclass in silent escalation. My phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Unknown numbers. Blocked IDs. Julian again. Then, an email from a personal Gmail address I recognized as belonging to Howard Briggs, the CFO and Cyrus's most loyal lapdog. Subject: Urgent clarification. Noah, I believe there may be a misunderstanding regarding some procedural anomalies. Your expertise would be invaluable in helping us clarify these matters offline. Can we schedule a confidential call? Discretion is assured. Howard procedural anomalies. Discretion is assured. The corporate doublespeak was pathetic. I imagined him sweating in his office, his perfectly knotted tie feeling like a noose. I didn't bother with a lengthy reply. I simply hit reply and typed 4 words. The time for discretion is over. I clicked send and immediately navigated away, back to the heart of my digital fortress. It was time to widen the net. Nexapoint was just the beginning. I began pulling on the other threads I'd found. Litech Analytics, Orion Strategic Solutions, each one a mirror of the first shell companies with UPS box addresses, invoices with vague descriptions, approved by junior staff under Julian's fast-track program. And then I found it. The connection that made me lean back in my chair, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. Riverstone Digital Partners. The invoices were smaller, only 2 of them. $2,500. $4,000. Seemingly insignificant compared to Nexapoint's haul. But the metadata on the remittance advice told a different story. The automated payment confirmation was CC'd to an email address. admin@brightpath-strategy.com, a domain I'd never seen before. A 5-minute Whois lookup later, and I had my answer. The domain was registered to one Logan Bryce. The administrative contact email, lbryce74@gmail.com. And the password recovery phone number listed? It was Julian's direct office line. Logan Bryce was Julian's middle name and his mother's maiden name. He wasn't even trying to be clever. He was skimming. 2. On a smaller scale, maybe a test run, or just pure, unadulterated greed. Cyrus was stealing through his wife's family. Julian was stealing for himself. The corruption wasn't just at the top. It was a family trait. I compiled it all, adding Riverstone to my growing map of deceit. The visual was now a sprawling, sickening constellation of theft, all leading back to the last name DEMIR. My phone rang again. This time, it was a number I recognized from HR Linda, the woman who'd been in the room when I was fired. Her voice was trembling, a stark contrast to her rehearsed professionalism from 2 days ago. Noah? Noah. Listen, I was asked to remind you of the confidentiality agreements you signed upon your departure. Any dissemination of proprietary information could result in severe legal repercussions. I almost laughed. Linda, I didn't sign a thing. You handed me a folder, and I walked out. There is no severance agreement. There are no signed NDAs. You have no leverage. Tell Cyrus he should have had Lagal do their job before they tried to do mine. I ended the call. The sheer incompetence was breathtaking. They were so arrogant, so sure of their power, that they hadn't even covered the basic mechanics of firing someone properly. They'd left the back door wide open. The final piece of my plan clicked into place that evening. An encrypted message popped up on a secure channel from a number I knew well. Stephen, one of the junior engineers I'd mentored. A good kid. They're losing it. Emergency all-hands meeting in the boardroom. Cyrus is yelling. Julian looks like he's going to be sick. Lawyers are here. What's happening? I typed back, my message simple and clear. Stay at your desk. Do what you're told. Watch everything. Say nothing. His reply was instant. Understood. I had eyes inside now. The panic was spreading. I knew Boole Mallory. I knew how he operated. He wouldn't call. He wouldn't email. He would receive my email, print it out, read it 3 times, and then pick up his phone and make one call to the head of internal security and the most trusted member of the external audit team. He would move silently and with absolute authority. Storm wasn't just coming. It was already inside the building, sitting in the boardroom, and they were just starting to feel the temperature drop. The next morning, I did something else I hadn't done since being fired. I got dressed in a suit and tie. Not for them. For me. For my father. Clara raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Just straightened my tie with a firm nod. At precisely 10 a.m., my home phone rang. The landline. A number only a handful of people had. I picked it up. Noah. The voice was a gravelly rumble. Bull Mallory. No greeting. No small talk. Bob, I got your email. I know. Is it real? The question was blunt, devoid of emotion. A simple request for a fact. Every byte. I have the raw logs, the metadata, the server timestamps. I can show you the moment Howard Briggs approved an Exapoint invoice from a beach in the Caymans. A grunt on the other end of the line. Cyrus? Up to his neck in it. And his son, Julian, has his own side operation. Riverstone Digital. Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear the calculations happening, the connections being made. Your father can't know. Not until it's done. It would break him. I know, I said, my voice softening for the first time in days. That's why I came to you. The board is convening an emergency session. Today, 4 p.m., he said. I'm suspending Cyrus Julian and Howard Briggs effective immediately. Pending a full forensic audit. Security will escort them out by noon. The first domino had fallen, and it had fallen hard. What do you need from me? I asked. Everything, Bull Mallory said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Bring me everything you have. The whole story. I want to see the map. I looked at the complex web of connections on my screen. A map of my family's betrayal. I'll be there, I said. I hung up the phone and looked at Clara. It's done. They're suspended. The audit has started. She didn't cheer. She just walked over, put her hands on my face, and looked me in the eye. You did what you had to do. For your father. For us. I nodded, the weight of it all suddenly pressing down on me. This wasn't a victory. It was a necessity. At 11:47 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Stephen. It was a single, blurry photo, taken from a fourth-floor window. In it, 3 figures were being escorted across the parking lot toward the building's exit. Cyrus, his head bowed. Julian, looking back at the building with sheer terror on his face. Howard Briggs, talking angrily to the security guard beside him. The caption read, Golf game ended early. I stared at the photo, at the humiliated postures of the men who thought they were untouchable, the men who had fired me with a typo on a piece of paper. The ghost in the machine had just become a hammer, and the first blows had landed. The drive to Demir Holdings felt like traveling to a different lifetime. The same streets, the same skyline, but I was a different man in the same suit. Clara had simply nodded as I left, her eyes saying everything her words didn't need to. The brass compass was a heavy, cool weight in my pocket. True north. I didn't park in my old spot. I parked in a visitor's space, a small, symbolic act of reclaiming my power. I wasn't coming back as a supplicant. I was coming as a witness. As the prosecution. The lobby was eerily silent. Tanya at the reception desk looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something that looked like vindication. She simply pointed a trembling finger toward the private executive elevators. They're waiting for you, Mr. Demir. The 12th floor. The ride up was smooth and silent. The doors opened not onto the familiar, chaotic hum of the IT floor, but onto a carpet so thick it swallowed sound. This was the sanctum sanctorum, the executive floor, a place I'd rarely had reason to visit. The air smelled of expensive coffee and anxiety. A young assistant I didn't recognize, nervous, early 20s, scrambled to her feet. Mr. Demir, this way, please. She led me down a hallway lined with framed accolades and corporate art worth. More than my annual salary. The door to the main boardroom was a massive slab of polished oak. She opened it for me, and I stepped inside. 10 faces turned to look at me. The entire board of directors, minus 3. Cyrus, Julian, and Howard's chairs were conspicuously, gloriously empty. The air was thick with tension. At the head of the table sat Bull Mallory, his expression unreadable. A printed copy of my initial email sitting on the table before him. Next to him sat Sandra Vance, the coup, now undoubtedly the interim CEO. Her face was pale, her hands clasped tightly together. "Noah," Bull said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast room. "Thank you for coming." I gave a single slight nod and took the empty seat at the opposite end of the table. I didn't speak. I placed my leather satchel on the table, but didn't open it. I just waited. Let them feel the weight of the silence. Let them marinate in the consequences of their negligence. Sandra Vance cleared her throat. "The information you single quotes V provided is deeply troubling. The board has voted unanimously to suspend Cyrus, Julian, and Howard indefinitely, pending a full forensic investigation. Initial estimates suggest the misappropriated funds exceed $5 million. I remained silent, my gaze steady. Her words were just noise. They were still talking about money. They didn't understand it was never about the money. Bull leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "We need to see it all, Noah. The full scope. No more previews." Finally, I moved. I opened my satchel and withdrew a single thick folder. Nada, USB drive, paper, tangible, undeniable proof you could hold in your hand. I slid it down the polished tabletop. It came to a stop perfectly in front of Bull. "This is the summary," I said, my voice quiet but clear, cutting through the room's tension like a laser. Chronological, cross-referenced, the master files, the digital evidence, the visual maps. They are secure. This will tell you the story. For the next hour, I didn't speak. I watched them read. I watched as their faces cycled through shock, disbelief, anger, and finally, a sickened shame. They saw the Nexapoint invoices. They saw the Cayman Islands, IP logs. They saw the Finks 4.2 approval group logs with Julian's username plastered all over them. And then they turned to the section on Riverstone Digital and my cousin's pathetic attempt at his own side hustle. A man named Evans, the head of the legal committee, finally looked up, his face ashen. This is premeditated, I finished. For him, my voice still calm. It's not embezzlement. It's a coordinated fraud, a family enterprise. Sandra Vance looked at me, a new fear in her eyes. The legal exposure. The SEC, the Doge, this will destroy the company. That was their doing. Not mine, I replied, my tone leaving no room for argument. My only concern was stopping the bleeding. Bull closed the folder with a definitive slap. The sound made several board members jump. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of respect in his gruff expression. "What do you want, Noah?" This was the moment, the pivot. This wasn't about retribution. It was about reconstruction. I opened my satchel again and withdrew a single sheet of paper. I slid it down the table. It listed 3 conditions: full, unrestricted, and permanent audit access for me to any and all company systems, past, present, and future. Unilateral veto power over any vendor relationship, financial decision, or appointment in the technology and finance departments. A newly created position, reporting directly and solely to the board, Chief Integrity Officer. The room erupted in a murmur of protests. Preposterous. Unprecedented oversight. That's effectively a coup. I let them talk. I waited for the noise to die down. When it did, I spoke one last time. The man you fired for being misaligned with the company's future was the only thing aligning this company with its founding principles. You have a choice. You can grant me the authority to fix the system they broke, or you can handle the coming storm without the one man who knows how to navigate it. You have until noon to decide. Stood up, collected my empty satchel, and walked out of the boardroom without a backward glance. The silence I left behind was absolute. I didn't wait in the building. I went down to the street, bought a coffee from a cart, and sat on a public bench, watching the traffic flow. The compass in my hand was cool. True north dot at 11:47 a.m. My phone buzzed. A text from Bull Mallory. Terms accepted. The position is yours. Effective immediately. Welcome back, Chief Integrity Officer. I didn't react. I just finished my coffee, stood up, and walked back toward the building. This time, I used my phone to access the security app I'd built years ago. With a few taps, I reactivated my keycard. The reader at the executive elevator blinked green. The doors opened. My first stop was not the boardroom. It was the IT floor. The fourth floor. My floor. I walked past the cubicles. The silence was different this time. Not avoidance, but awe. Heads popped up. Eyes followed me. Stephen saw me, and his jaw dropped. He gave me a hesitant, hopeful thumbs dash up. My old cubicle was already occupied. A young guy with huge headphones, his back to me. I didn't care. That life was over. I turned and walked toward the corner office, the one that had always been empty, reserved for a VIP who never came. Taped to the door was a temporary placard, handwritten on a piece of printer paper, Chief Integrity Officer Endemir. I opened the door and stepped inside. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the skyline, a desk, a chair. It was empty, but it was mine. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock. Sandra Vance stood there, holding a new folder. This one had my name spelled correctly. "We need to discuss the forensic audit," she said, her voice subdued. "The external auditors are waiting for your guidance." I looked at her, then past her, out at the city. "Start with the vendor intake policy," I said, my voice calm, assured. "It hasn't been updated in 7 years. That's where the rot set in." She nodded, jotting it down. "Of course, I'll let them know." She left, closing the door softly. Behind her, I was alone, in the silence. In the office, the ghost was no longer in the machine. He was now its master, and his work was just beginning. The corner office was too quiet. The hum of the servers 12 floors below was a distant memory, replaced by the sterile whisper of the climate control. The plaque on my door, now permanent and brass, read, "Chief Integrity Officer, Noah Demir." It was a weapon, not an honor dot. My first act was not to call a meeting or draft a memo. It was to have Clara bring me the cactus from my old home office desk. I placed it on the broad, empty windowsill, its stubborn, leaning presence a silent declaration that I was not here to decorate. I was here to grow in impossible places. My second act was to log into the system with my new, God-level credentials. I didn't go after Cyrus, or Julian, or Howard. Their digital corpses were already being picked over by the forensic teams I'd authorized. Instead, I went after the environment that allowed them to thrive. The fertile soil of negligence. I started with the vendor intake process. As I told Sandra, it was a 7-year-old joke, a digital rubber stamp. I drafted a new policy, not as a suggestion, but as a mandate. Every new vendor would now require a multi-factor authentication process, a background check that pierced through shell LLCs, and a mandatory 48-hour cooling-off period before approval. The final sign-off? Mine. Only mine. I sent it to the legal and finance departments with a single line in the body of the email. Effective immediately. Non-negotiable. The replies were instantaneous, a flurry of panicked questions about workflow disruption and efficiency concerns. I didn't respond. Let them panic. Efficiency was what got us here. My door opened without a knock. Sandra Vance stood there, her face a mask of strained composure. Noah, the board is getting calls. People are saying you're instituting a dictatorship. I didn't look up from my screen. Good. Then they understand the situation perfectly. We have a business to run, she insisted, her voice tightening. No, I said, finally meeting her gaze. You had a business that was being looted. I am here to ensure it runs. There is a difference. She opened her mouth to retort, but then her eyes fell on the cactus on the windowsill. She stared at it for a long moment, as if deciphering a code. She closed her mouth, gave a curt, frustrated nod, and left, closing the door softly behind her. The message was received. Next knock was softer. Stephen stood in the doorway, looking like a student outside the principal's office. You, you wanted to see me? I didn't, I said. But you're here. Come in. He stepped in, his eyes wide as he took in the view. The office, the sheer aura of unspoken power. Everyone's talking. They don't know what to do. They should do their jobs, I said, my voice neutral. The same way they did them before, but now with the knowledge that someone is watching properly. Is it true? About Mr. Demir and Julian? He asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. The truth is in the server logs, Stephen. It's always been there. People just chose not to look. I turned my monitor around. It showed the complex, beautiful, damning map of connections I'd built, the web of shell companies and fraudulent invoices. This is what happens when no one is willing to be bored, when no one is willing to do the tedious work of checking. He stared, mesmerized and horrified. I never thought to look. That was the problem. I turned the screen back. I'm starting a seminar. System integrity and the human factor. No PowerPoints, no HR memos. Just the truth. Every Wednesday. 7:30 a.m. Be there? He nodded, his earlier fear replaced by a spark of determination. I will. The following days were a study in quiet, relentless transformation. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My presence in the system was like a gravitational pull, bending processes and protocols toward a new center of gravity. Invoices were questioned. Approvals were scrutinized. The culture of careless rubber stamping began to wither and die under the new, unforgiving light. I received a FedEx envelope. Inside was a formal letter from the law firm representing Cyrus. It was a cease and desist, threatening legal action for defamation and corporate espionage. I read it once, then picked up the phone and called Boole Mallory. I just received a letter from Cyrus's lawyers. I said, a grunt. I got one too. Ignore it. It's a Hail Mary. The forensic accountants found the first million. It's wired directly to account in the Caymans under Patricia Wilcox's maiden name. They're finished. I hung up, a cold satisfaction settling in my bones. They were panicking, lashing out from the abyss. That afternoon, a small folded note was slipped under my door. No name, just a sentence written in a shaky hand. I voted to remove you. I was wrong. I read it 5 times. It wasn't the apology that mattered. It was the admission. It was the crack in the armor of the collective denial that had almost doomed this company. I tucked it into my drawer, a more valuable trophy than any plaque. The final test came on Friday. An invoice hit my virtual desk for approval. It was from a long-standing, legitimate vendor, but the amount was 15% higher than the previous quarters, with a vague note about global supply chain adjustments. The junior manager had already approved it. The system was waiting for my final veto or consent. I could have approved it. It was probably legitimate, but probably wasn't good enough anymore. Not for me. I flagged it. Reason. Justification insufficient. Require itemized breakdown of cost increases. Within 10 minutes. The head of procurement was on the phone, his voice strained. Noah, that's a standard adjustment. We've always approved these. You're going to delay a critical shipment. Then, they should have provided the breakdown preemptively, I said, my voice calm. Always is not a justification. It's an excuse. Send me the details. An hour later, a detailed line item justification landed in my inbox. It was legitimate. I approved it immediately. The message was sent, louder than any shout. The era of always was over. The era of why had begun. As I left the office. That night, the floor was still busy, but the energy was different. It wasn't the frantic energy of fear or gossip. It was the focused hum of people actually doing their jobs, knowing that their work would be seen, would be checked, would matter. Stephen was working late, his brow furrowed in concentration as he reviewed a server log. He saw me and gave a small, confident nod. Not a thumbs up, a nod of understanding, of shared purpose. I nodded back. I wasn't just building defenses. I was building an army, not of soldiers, but of stewards. The architect of the family's ruin was now laying the foundation for something new, something stronger, something that could never be stolen again. 6 months passed. The skyline beyond my corner office window didn't change. The steel and gloss of Atlanta continued to gleam under the sun, indifferent to the human dramas playing out within. But the air inside Demir Holdings had been transformed. The silence in the halls was no longer born of fear, but of respect for the rules, for the process, for the quiet man who had enforced them without ever raising his voice. The arrests made headlines. Cyrus, Julian, and Howard were indicted on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The evidence was so overwhelming that their lawyers immediately began negotiating pleas. The story was a sensational scandal for a week, then was replaced by the next news cycle. But inside the company, the echo was permanent. I had done what I returned to do. I had scorched the earth of their corruption and salted it, so nothing like it could ever grow again. The new vendor protocols were ironclad. The audit trails were impeccable. The culture had shifted from willful blindness to vigilant oversight. One Thursday, Sandra Vance came to my office. She held a manila folder, but this time it wasn't a report. It was an offer. Robert Mallory is retiring, she said, her voice careful, measured. The board is unanimous. They want you to take over as chairman. She placed the folder on my desk. I didn't open it. I looked past her, out at the city, at the building my father had built. I saw the ghost of my old self in the server room. The younger man who believed his worth was tied to this glass and steel monument. I'm not here to rise, Sandra, I said, my voice quiet but absolute. I was never here to climb. I was here to guard. The bridge is secure. It's time for me to cross it for the last time. She blinked, surprised not by the refusal, but by its finality. The company needs strong leadership, Noah. Who better? Than you? The company needs new blood. People who haven't been poisoned by the old ways. I slid a single sheet of paper toward her. On it, I had written 2 names, Stephen for systems oversight, and Anya Sharma from compliance. She's the one who challenged the Orion Systems renewal last month. She's 29. So was I. When I started, Sandra looked at the names, then back at me. A slow, reluctant understanding dawned on her face. She nodded once, picked up the folder, and left without another word. The future wasn't about tenure. It was about character. In my final weeks, I kept my promise. I taught in the basement conference room that smelled faintly of wet carpet. system integrity, and the human factor. No slides, no memos, just truth. And they came. Not just engineers, but marketers, accountants, assistants. They filled the room, their faces eager, hungry for a purpose that wasn't just a paycheck. I never mentioned the scandal. I didn't have to. I spoke about the weight of a single keystroke, the ethics of a line of code, the courage required to be bored and thorough. I taught them that integrity isn't a policy. It's a position you hold, whether anyone is watching or not. On my last official day, a Wednesday, I didn't make a speech. I arrived early, emptied my desk into my old leather satchel, the one from my father. I left the cactus on Stephen's desk with a note that said, "Don't forget to water it." I placed my keycard on the bare desk and walked out. I took one final walk through the building, not as a farewell, but as a quiet acknowledgement. I had been here. I had held the line dot in the lobby. The new receptionist, a young man named Andre, who always wore bow ties, smiled at me. "I read your seminar notes on the archive server, Mr. Gamir. I think you're kind of a legend." I smiled back, a genuine, unburdened smile. "Legends are just people everyone forgot to check on," I said. "I'm just a man who stayed long enough to finish what he started." I stepped outside. The wind was sharp, but honest. I walked home, letting the cold air cleanse me of the last 17 years. I passed the old Stratton warehouse, the company's first home, now a trendy cafe called Blue Code. The outline of the old sign was still faintly visible on the brick, like a ghost. Some things fade, but they never truly disappear. I got home. Clara was waiting. She had 2 glasses of bourbon and something wrapped in linen on the kitchen table. "I found this in the attic," she said. I unwrapped it. It was my father's old compass, the one I thought I'd lost years ago. It was scratched and dented, but when I opened it, the needle swung unerringly to north. "Does it still work?" Clara asked. I looked from the compass to her face, to the home we had built together, to the life that was waiting for me beyond the corporate battlefield. "It doesn't matter if it's right," I said, smiling, "as long as it reminds you what right used to feel like." That night, I stood in our backyard. The sky was clear, the air still. My phone buzzed. A message from Stephen, the new hire, asked me what makes a system truly secure. I told him, not the code, not the policy, the person who never looks away. I didn't reply. I just looked up at the stars, constant, quiet, and unfailing beyond any edit or committee. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible, not because anyone remembered me, but because I had finally remembered myself. I had left something behind, a bridge, a line in the code, a standard, a silence that would echo long after my footsteps had faded from those polished hallway floors. The quiet man's revenge was never about noise. It was about legacy. And mine was finally, completely, my own.